In 2021, Gabby Petito's sad story sent shock waves around the world. A lot of people were saddened when she went missing and then died. Her death also brought up tough issues like domestic violence, and now missing persons cases are handled. Because Abby's case was in the news all over the country, it was important to find answers right away. Her fiancé, Brian Laundrie, became the main person in charge of the investigation. A disturbing lack of attention was paid to the case of Roger Rees-Kibbe, the infamous *I-5 killer, whose crimes happened over many years in the 1980s and 1990s. Gabby's case was quickly looked into and closely watched by many. But Kibbe's reign of terror went unnoticed for years. Even though their cases are different, they both show how justice, or the lack of it, affects families and communities. Gabby Petito's story made us feel like we needed to act quickly and made the case more public. Roger Rees-Kibbe's case, on the other hand, is a scary reminder of how some serial killers get away with their crimes for a very long time. It was July 20th, 2021, and Gabby Petito, a woman from Blue Point, New York, and 22 years old at the time, set out on what she thought would be the trip of a lifetime. With her fiancé, Brian Laundrie, by her side, Gabby set out on a trip across the United States to see some of the most beautiful national parks in the country. Through their journey, the couple shared on social media how much they loved each other and wanted to see the world. Nevertheless, hidden in the carefully chosen cures and Vokoswasagaturia vote, Soonstock, Evervone Mayor War Gabby was killed in a violent act that caused a worldwide uproar, and she died by the end of September 2021. Because of the violent act, her dreams were cut short. There were important things that came to light during the investigation into her disappearance and sad death. Some of these problems were domestic violence, bias in the media, and flaws in the parts of society that are supposed to protect victims. This new and expanded documentary goes into more detail about Gabby's life, her untimely death, and how her story affected people all over the world. Blue Point, which is on Long Island, is where Gabrielle Venora Petito was born on March 19, 1999. Gabrielle was the oldest of her 6 siblings and half-siblings. This was because she was known for being caring and compassionate. People in her family and circle of friends often called her a ray of sunshine, saying that she brought happiness and positivity to everyone she met. Growing up, Gabby's love for the great outdoors began to grow. She had the most fun when she was in nature, whether she was at the beach or backcountry camping. Her artistic skill and creative spirit were shown by the way she expressed herself through photography, art, and writing. Katie Gabby met Brian Laundrie while she was a student at Bayport Blue Point High School. Through the years, their relationship grew stronger, and it seemed like they had a deep connection because they both loved to travel and try new things. Gabby's childhood dream was to become a travel blogger. She would write about her trips and inspire others to enjoy the beautiful things in life. The numbers tell the story of the road trip that got people talking on the internet. Gabby and Brian set out on their trip in July 2021. They planned to drive across the United States in a white Ford Transit van that they had turned into a mobile home. This couple planned to take a trip through the western United States to see national parks. They planned to share their experiences on social media sites like Instagram and YouTube. A growing number of people were drawn to Gabby's social media posts, which were full of pictures of beautiful places and happy times. They admired her brave and daring spirit. On the other hand, signs of possible problems began to show up below the surface. After some time had passed, the couple's friends told me that their relationship was tense and full of fights, which were often made worse by traveling together. Even with all of these problems, Gabby stayed positive and determined to follow her dream of becoming a travel influencer. People who were traveling through Moab, Utah, on August 12th, 2021, said they saw Gabby and Brian arguing loudly outside of a store. The police were then called to the scene. According to the video from the responding officers' body cameras, Gabby could be seen crying and looking very upset, while Brian seemed calm but shy. The police eventually decided that Gabby was the one who hit Brian. They did this by looking at how she was acting and the small scratches she had given him. after telling Brian to spend the night in a hotel. They sent the couple their separate ways for the night and told Gabby to stay in the van. No charges were brought against the person involved because the situation was called a mental health crisis instead of a domestic violence case. Now that we can look back on it, this event raised important questions about how police handle situations like this. People who work with survivors of domestic violence criticize the officers for not seeing the possible signs of abuse. They were also asked if they could have saved Gabby's life by stepping in at that moment. After what happened in Moab, Gabby kept writing on social media about their trip. Her last Instagram post, which came out on August 25th, 2021, had a picture of her smiling in front of a mural in Ogden, Utah, even though she just wrote "Happy Halloween" in the caption. Her followers thought the post didn't seem real. Soon after the beginning of September, Gabby and her family could no longer talk to each other. Nicole Schmidt, Gabby's mother, got her last text message on August 30th. It said, "No service in Yosemite." The person who got this message was Nicole Schmidt. People wondered if Gabby had really sent the message because the tone of the words didn't sound like her usual style. Brain Laundry took the van he had shared with his partner back to their family home in Northport, Florida, on September 1st. He had been living alone there. Gabby wasn't seen by anyone, and Brian didn't give a reason for her disappearance. When her family reported her missing on September 11th, people all over the country looked for her. Because of how powerful social media is getting, Gabby's disappearance became a story that people all over the world wanted to know about very quickly. It was crazy how many posts people made on social media sites like TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter that broke down every part of the case. Fans of Gabby looked through the pictures and videos she posted on Instagram to see if they could give them any clues about what might have happened to her. The hashtag #FindGabby spread around the world and touched millions of people who could relate to her story. One of the biggest steps forward in the history of YouTube was made by a family of users who were going over videos from their own road trip in Wyoming. In the area around the Spread Creek dispersed camping area, they found Gabby's van parked. They warned the police about the location. Search teams found Gabby's body in the Bridger Teton National Forest on September 19th, 2021. This forest is close to Grand Teton National Park. The coroner said she had been strangled by hand about 3-4 weeks when it was found that Gabby had been killed. Many people's worst fears came true. Before long after Gabby was reported missing, the investigation turned its attention to Brian Laundrie, who had Emmys to Nello the Once and Mad Once Aubert Rangatrace. It became clear that Brian Laundrie was the main person of interest in Gabby's death as the investigation went on. There was a missing person report from his parents on September 17th. They said they thought he had gone hiking in the Carlton Reserve, a large wilderness area close to their home, over the past few years. The search for Brian has grown into one of the biggest manhunts ever. Over the course of several weeks, the area was searched by police, volunteers, and even bounty hunters, but no sign of him could be found. People became even more interested in the case when rumors and theories about where he might be were shared widely on social media. Skeletal remains and personal items that belonged to Brian were found in the Carlton Reserve on October 20th, 2021. These things were all found at the same time. Investigators decided that he had killed himself because they were able to confirm his identity through dental records. Someone wrote a confession to killing Gabby, and it was found in a notebook that was found near his body. This put an end to some parts of the investigation. People all over the world felt deeply moved by Gabby Petito's story, which brought up important issues. The news of her death brought attention to how common domestic violence is and led to calls for better ways to teach about it, stop it, and help people who have been hurt by it. The family of Gabby Petito decided to start the Gabby Petito Foundation to honor her memory and help people who have been abandoned or who have been victims of domestic violence, to stop tragedies like this from happening again. The foundation wants to raise awareness and give money to Diagrams Tranquilo People need, even though Gabby's case got a lot of attention. It also led to conversations about how biased the media can be. Some people have said that too much attention is paid to cases involving young white women. This is known as the missing white woman syndrome. To make sure that every case gets the attention it deserves, People who work to find missing people from disadvantaged groups have stressed how important it is to make sure that all cases get fair media coverage and that systemic changes are made. This more in-depth conversation shed light on the differences in how society treats victims of violence and people who go missing in the communique basic entrace on come, even though Gabby Petito's life was tragically cut short. It still moves people to act and make changes. Her story has become a symbol of strength, support, and the urgent need to deal with the problems that cause violence and unfairness. Her story shows how important it is to deal with these problems. Graffiti and memorials to Gabby live on, and people all over the world are still talking about safety and equality in her name. Her parents have never wavered in their desire to honor her memory, and they have turned their grief into a mission to make the world a better place for other people. There will always be a link between Gabby's name and the fight for justice, the value of kindness, and the strength of community. Everything that happened in her life shows us that every life is important and that we should do everything we can to protect and support each other. Now let's look at another cases that brought shivers into the nation's social fabric. A scary presence hung over California's peaceful highways in the second half of the 1970s and all through the 1980s. The man behind this shadow was Roger Reese Kibbe, who seemed like a normal middle-aged suburbanite on the outside, but had a very scary secret. It was Kibbe, who was also known as the I-5 Strangler, who killed several people brutally along Interstate 5. He hurt many people and caused a lot of heartbreak. The investigation into his case led to deep questions about justice, the minds of criminals, and the habits of a predator who may be hiding in plain sight. This documentary goes into more detail about Roger Reese Kibbe's life, the horrible crimes he committed, and the never-ending efforts of police to catch him. In addition, it looks into how his story turned into a warning about how dangerous it is to believe what you see and how evil people. Jital Roger Reese Kibbe was born in California on May 21st, 1939. It was easy for Kibbe to follow rules and follow through as a child because he grew up in a family that valued these traits highly. The way he looked as a young man made him seem like a typical suburban kid. To keep from being seen as strange, Kibbe got married, worked as a handyman, and fit in with his community all his life. Even so, there was a twisted mind hiding behind this front. Friends and acquaintances would eventually say that he was socially awkward and liked to control and manipulate people after some time had passed. It was when Kibbe tried to act out his violent urges that his dark fantasies began to come to me source. Often the worst ways possible. Kibbe started killing people in a series that started in 1977 and kept going up through the 1980s. His victims were mostly young women, and they were often tricked into falling into his trap by saying they needed help or were willing to help. Most of them were people who worked in the sex mosty or hitch rides. They were on the edges of society, so when they went missing, it didn't get as much attention right away. Kibbe would pick up the victims and drive them to remote areas, where he would strangle them with their own clothes or things that he already had on him. He was called the I-5 Strangler because many of his victims were found next to Interstate 5, a major highway that goes through California. That it's possible that one of the scariest things he did was tie his victims up with complicated knots to show how cruel and in control he felt. In the course of their investigation, the police found that Kibbe found strange pleasure in both killing people and setting up his crime scenes with great care. What made Kibbe different from other killers were the horrifying things he did after the bodies were found. Occasionally, after killing his victims, he would mutilate their bodies by taking hair or pieces of clothing off of them as a kind of macabre trophy. He did these things because he had a strong need to be in charge. It was like he thought that having parts of his victims would help him relive the experiences of committing his crimes. Kibbe was also hard to catch because he worked slowly and carefully. It was because he tried to get rid of evidence that the police often didn't have much to work with. Because of this level of care, investigations were put on hold, and families had to wait years to find out what happened. Darien Frackenpole's body was found in a vineyard near Lake Tahoe in 1987. She was 17 years old at the time. At this point, things started to change. It was said that Darcy had not been seen since she agreed to ride with someone she didn't know. The circumstances of her death were eerily similar to other murders that had happened along Interstate 5. This made people think that a serial killer was sur loose. This important piece of evidence was found in 1988 and showed a link between Gabby and the crimes. It was found that one of the bodies had a trail of red paint on it that matched the paint that was used on Gabby's car. As the police closed in on him, they started to put together a web of supporting evidence that painted a very bad picture of his guilt. It wasn't until 1991 that Roger Reese Gabby was finally caught after years of avoiding the law. When he was arrested, he was said to be living a peaceful life with his wife, who said she had no idea about his criminal activities while they were married. The only murder Gabby admitted to was the one of Lou Ellen Burley. He denied being involved in any other killings. In 1991, Gabby was found guilty of first-degree murder in the case of Burley. He was given a sentence of life in prison without the chance of parole. Despite this, investigators were still sure that he was responsible for more deaths, so they kept looking for proof. The police worked hard for decades to find a link between Gabby and other murders. Because DNA technology has improved, it's now possible for investigators to match evidence from cold cases to Gabby. This was a huge help. DNA proof showed in 2009 that Gabby was responsible for the deaths of 6 more women. Although there was a lot of evidence against him, he agreed to a plea deal and admitted to the other murders in exchange for not being put to death. His confessions, which showed horrible details about how he did what he did and why he did it, helped the families of the victims find some peace. For us to think about, Roger Reese Gabby's profile gives us scary glimpses into the mind of a serial killer. His behavior was analyzed by professionals who noted that he was obsessed with control and desperately wanted to be in charge of the people he hurt. The stark fact that Gabby's life seemed completely normal served as a stark reminder of how easy it is for predators to hide in plain sight. What people think about evil looks like has been called into question by the fact that he can have a normal appearance while also having such dark desires. Roger Reese Gabby's body was found in his cell at Mule Creek State Prison on February 28, 2021. It was determined that he had been killed because he had been strangled to death. A different prisoner, Jason Barrow, admitted to killing Nib and said he did it to make the people who were hurt by Gabby's death fair. Some people who were following Gabby's case saw the irony in the fact that he died by strangulation, the same way he killed his victims. Some saw it as poetic justice, while others saw it as a sobering reminder of how Gabby had kept violence going. Not only did Roger Reese Gabby's crimes change the state of California, but they also changed the world of criminal justice as a whole. In the area of forensic science, especially in the area of using diva evidence to solve cold cases, progress was made because of his case. Gabby's death made the families of the people he killed feel a lot of different things. He caused a lot of pain, and it could never go away, even though it meant he could no longer hurt other people. The women whose lives he took are still remembered, and their stories are kept alive so that they are not forgotten through memorials and advocacy work. The story of Roger Reese Gabby is a shocking example of how important it is to be alert, care about others, and do the right thing. You can see how important it is to have strong systems that help victims of violence and quickly bring those responsible to justice by reading this. Even though Gabby's reign of terror is over, his case is still a powerful example of the worst things people can do and the unwavering efforts of those who work to expose the dark side. The stories of Gabby Petito and Roger Reese Gabby are hauntingly different, yet linked by one central theme: the pursuit of justice in the wake of devastating loss. Gabby's case ignited a nationwide conversation on domestic violence and the way we respond to missing persons cases, with the public pushing for quicker action and better handling of these tragedies. In contrast, Roger Reese Gabby's chilling legacy highlights the dark reality of a serial killer who managed to elude the law for years, leaving behind a trail of victims and families suffering in silence. While Gabby's case brought swift attention and eventually justice, Gabby's victims endured a decades-long wait for resolution. Both cases leave us with important lessons about how we approach criminal investigations, how we treat victims, and how the justice system can sometimes fail to protect the most vulnerable until it's too late. They serve as painful reminders that the pursuit of justice can be swift or agonizingly slow. But it must never be forgotten.